Why Turkey never took on the Soviet Union in World War II. A tale of strategy, fear, and global power plays. Picture this, it's the 1940s, and the world is a powder keg. World War II is raging, with Nazi Germany steamrolling across Europe, the Soviet Union fighting for its life, and the United States gearing up to become the arsenal of democracy. Right in the middle of this chaos sits Turkey, a country with a storied past, a chip on its shoulder, and a front row seat to one of history's greatest conflicts. Turkey, once the heart of the mighty Ottoman Empire, had a long history of clashing with Russia. So, when Hitler's armies invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, it seemed like the perfect moment for Turkey to settle old scores and maybe grab some territory. But they didn't. Why? Buckle up, because we're about to dive into a story of espionage, military missteps, and cold, hard pragmatism that kept Turkey out of the fight. For American audiences, this story hits home in a unique way. The U.S. was a rising superpower during World War II, supplying the Allies with everything from tanks to spam. Turkey's decision to stay neutral wasn't just about its own survival, it had ripple effects on the global stage, including America's strategy in the war. From the Lend-Lease program to the fight for control of vital sea routes, Turkey's choices shaped the world the U.S. was fighting for. So, let's break it down, explore the economic stakes, and see what we can learn from this overlooked chapter of history. Got your popcorn ready? Let's go! A rocky history. Turkey and Russia's long feud. To get why Turkey even considered taking on the Soviet Union, we need to rewind the clock. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire and Russia were like two heavyweight boxes, duking it out over control of the Black Sea, the Caucasus, and the all-important Straits of the Bosporus and Dardanelles. These waterways were the gateway to global trade and military power, and both sides wanted the keys. Fast forward to the 20th century, and the Ottoman Empire is gone, replaced by a scrappy new Turkey under Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, is rebuilding after its own revolution and civil war. In the 1920s, Turkey and the USSR actually got along for a bit. Both were outsiders in a world dominated by Western powers like Britain and France. A 1925 friendship treaty was a rare moment of peace between them. But things soured fast. In 1929, Turkey rolled out the red carpet for Leon Trotsky, Stalin's arch-nemesis, who was exiled from the USSR. Letting Trotsky set up shop on Turkish soil was like poking a bear with a stick. Stalin didn't forget, and the rift grew. By 1939, the world was a mess. Turkey signed a mutual assistance pact with Britain and France, who were wary of both Germany and the USSR. Meanwhile, the Soviets inked the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Nazi Germany, splitting Poland like a pizza. Turkey was caught in the middle, trying to play all sides without getting burned. Sound familiar? It's like trying to navigate a family reunion where everyone's feuding. What would you do in Turkey's shoes? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious to hear your take. 1941. The high of German victories when Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa on June 22, 1941. Invading the Soviet Union, Turkey's leaders were practically popping champagne. The German war machine looked unstoppable, and many in Ankara thought the USSR was toast. Turkish Foreign Minister Kukru Sarakoglu was reportedly over the moon, dodging calls from well-wishers to bask in the moment. The British ambassador noted that Sarakoglu was grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. Why the celebration? Turkey saw a chance to wipe out its old rival and maybe snatch some Soviet land like the oil-rich fields of Azerbaijan or parts of Armenia. The Nazis played into this fantasy big time. Their propaganda machine, led by Joseph Goebbels, was working overtime. They dangled promises of a new Europe where Turkey would get a slice of the pie, including Soviet territories in the Caucasus. There were even wild rumors that Hitler had secretly converted to Islam to seal the deal. A Turkish newspaper, Cumhuriyet, went as far as to say Hitler was the only leader who truly got Ataturk's vision. Talk about drinking the Kool-Aid. But here's where it gets interesting for us Americans. The U.S. wasn't fully in the war yet. Pearl Harbor was still 6 months away, but we were already sending supplies to the Allies through the Lend-Lease Act. Turkey's flirtation with Germany raised eyebrows in Washington. If Turkey joined the Axis, it could have blocked vital supply routes to the USSR, making America's job harder. Imagine the headache for FDR if Turkey had jumped into the fray. How do you think the US would have handled it? Share your ideas in the comments. Turkey's Achilles heel. A weak military. Here's the kicker. Turkey's dreams of glory were bigger than its biceps. The Turkish army was no match for the Soviet juggernaut, even with the USSR on the ropes. Winston Churchill summed it up brutally. Turkey's got 50 divisions of brave infantry, but that's about it. No modern air force, no tanks to speak of, no anti-aircraft guns, and definitely no industry to build them. Ouch. Without the factories to churn out weapons or the tech to compete, Turkey was like a guy showing up to a gunfight with a slingshot. Let's put this in perspective with some numbers. In 1941, the Soviet Union had over 20,000 tanks, including the game-changing T-34. Turkey, maybe a few dozen outdated models. The USSR's Air Force, while battered, could still field thousands of planes. Turkey's Air Force was a handful of creaky biplanes that belonged in a museum. And don't get me started on logistics. Turkey's troops didn't even have modern radios. Training was another issue. Many soldiers were barely literate, making it tough to teach them how to use complex equipment. For Americans, this might remind you of the debates we've had about military readiness. Even today, the U.S. spends about 3.5% of its GDP on defense, $877 billion in 2024, according to the Pentagon. Turkey in the 1940s was scraping by with a military budget that was a fraction of that, maybe 10% of its tiny GDP. No wonder they thought twice about picking a fight with Stalin. Economic realities, a nation on a budget. Let's talk money, because it's always about the money. Turkey in the 1940s was an agrarian economy, leaning hard on crops like wheat, cotton, and tobacco. Its GDP was around $4 billion in today's dollars, peanuts compared to the USSR's $100 billion or the U.S.'s $100 billion. Turkey relied on imports for 60% of its fuel and 80% of its industrial goods, according to economic historians. A war with the USSR would have cut off access to Black Sea trade routes, tanking the economy faster than you can say inflation. Compare that to the U.S., which was an economic powerhouse even before entering the war. By 1941, America's industrial output was ramping up, with factories churning out everything from Jeeps to bombers. The U.S. could afford to arm itself and its allies, thanks to a GDP that dwarfed most other nations. Turkey, on the other hand, was stuck in neutral. No industry, no resources, no chance. This economic angle is a big reason why Turkey stayed out of the fight. Going to war would have been like betting your whole paycheck on a horse with 3 legs. I can't help but wonder how things might have played out if Turkey had the industrial muscle of, say, the US or Britain. Could they have tipped the scales? Let me know what you think in the comments. Espionage and intrigue. Turkey as a spy central. By 1942, Turkey was like a real-life spy novel. Ankara and Istanbul were crawling with agents from Germany, Britain, and the USSR, all trying to sway the Turkish government. The Germans whispered promises of land and power. The British offered protection from a Nazi invasion. The Soviets? They just glared and said, "Don't even think about it." Turkey played the game like a pro, keeping everyone guessing. Despite declaring neutrality in June 1941, Turkey wasn't exactly neutral. They supplied Germany with chromium, a key ingredient for weapons, and let Nazi ships slip through the Bosporus and Dardanelles, bending international rules. At the same time, Turkey kept cozy with the Allies, hoping to stay on their good side. Soviet intelligence caught wind of Turkish sabotage operations near the Armenian border, forcing the USSR to divert troops from the main front. For the US, this was a headache waiting to happen. By 1942, America was fully in the war, and Turkey's fence-sitting could have messed with supply lines to the USSR. The Lend-Lease program was shipping billions in aid, $50 billion total by war's end, and any disruption in the Black Sea could have slowed that down. Turkey's double-dealing kept Washington on edge, wondering if they'd pick a side or just keep playing both. Stalingrad, the game changer. Everything changed with the Battle of Stalingrad, from August 1942 to February 1943. The Soviets didn't just hold the line, they crushed the German Sixth Army, capturing Field Marshal Paulus and over 100,000 soldiers. This wasn't just a military win, it was a signal to the world that the USSR wasn't going anywhere. For Turkey, it was a wake-up call. The Red Army wasn't the pushover they'd hoped. Suddenly, the idea of invading the Soviet Union looked like a suicide mission. Turkey's leaders, who'd been dreaming of oil fields and a reborn Ottoman Empire, started backpedaling. By 1943, they cut off chromium supplies to Germany and started making nice with the Allies. When the Soviets demanded answers about Turkish troop movements near Armenia, Ankara spun a wild story about protecting the Black Sea coast from German landings. Sure, and I've got a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn. From an American perspective, Stalingrad was a turning point too. The U.S. was now fully committed to the Allied cause, and the Soviet victory meant Lend-Lease aid was paying off. Turkey's shift to the Allied side, however subtle, was a win for Washington. It kept the Black Sea open and ensured supplies kept flowing to the USSR. Reflections. What can we learn? This story is more than just a history lesson, it's a masterclass in strategy and survival. Turkey's leaders wanted to flex their muscles, but they knew their limits. They played a dangerous game, balancing between giants, and came out unscathed. For Americans, it's a reminder of how global conflicts often hinge on the decisions of smaller players. Turkey's neutrality helped keep the war's balance in the Allies' favor, even if it wasn't intentional. I can't help but think about how this applies to today. The U.S. is still a global superpower, with a defense budget bigger than the next 10 countries combined. But smaller nations, like Turkey was back then, can still shape the world by what they do or don't do. What if Turkey had joined the Axis? Would the U.S. have had to divert resources to the Middle East? Share your thoughts in the comments, I'd love to hear your take. Economic Deep Dive. The stakes of war. Let's zoom out and look at the bigger economic picture. In the 1940s, Turkey's economy was a fraction of the USS. With a GDP of $4 billion, it was dwarfed by America's $200 billion war machine. The U.S. could churn out 300,000 planes and 75,000 tanks during the war, while Turkey struggled to keep its troops fed. The Soviet Union, despite its losses, had the industrial might to produce 15,000 tanks a year by 1943. Turkey. They were lucky to scrape together a few dozen. The real prize Turkey eyed was the Caucasus, especially Azerbaijan's oil fields. In 1941, Baku produced 70% of the USSR's oil, about 23 million tons annually. Capturing that would have crippled the Soviets, but it was a pipe dream. Turkey's army couldn't navigate the rugged Caucasus Mountains, let alone take on the Red Army. Plus, a war would have tanked Turkey's trade-dependent economy, cutting off imports and exports through the Black Sea. Today, Turkey's a different story. Its 2024 GDP is $1.1 trillion, per the World Bank, making it a regional powerhouse. But back then, it was a small fish in a big pond, and jumping into the war would have been economic suicide. For the U.S., this underscores the importance of economic strength in global conflicts, a lesson we still lean on today. Hey, patriots, history buffs, and curious minds, this story's just the tip of the iceberg. If you love diving into this World War II drama, smash that subscribe button and let me know what you think in the comments. Should Turkey have taken the risk, or was staying neutral the smart move? How would you have played it as a U.S. strategist back then? Drop your thoughts below, and let's keep the conversation going. Don't forget to like and share for more epic history breakdowns.